excited to be here. As you just heard, I am a licensed clinical psychologist, so very passionate about, talking on mental health topics, destigmatizing mental health, increasing access to care. I've worked in healthcare for about 20 years, so really my focus now is on clinical strategy, clinical innovation, building clinical services. It's a super fun job. I'm very grateful for it. And currently I work for ComPsych Corporation. So that is one of the world's leading EAP providers. So as I think about mental wellness today, I'm more focused on employees, right, our workforce, and helping employees have strong mental well-being, be productive at home, be productive in the workplace. That is my goal. And I'm really excited that mental health and mental well-being benefits made it today's agenda. I'm super grateful about that. I'm very excited about it. It makes sense to me, right? It's not a surprise to me because we know today, now more than ever, mental health benefits, they're no longer nice to haves, right? They're no longer considered add-ons. They're no longer considered extras. They are now considered a business imperative, right? Raise your hand if you think mental wellness and mental well-being is important for your employees. Awesome, everyone here, thank you. That's the right answer, by the way, right? We all know that. Raise your hand if you think your employees expect more today than maybe 3 years ago with mental wellness benefits. Most people, absolutely, right? We see that. We see it in the research. We see it in surveys that employees absolutely are expecting more when it comes to their mental health benefits. We need it now. We need it to attract talent. We need it to retain talent. As you're going to see when I get to some of the proof points and the data points, right? We need it so we can impact our business outcomes. There's a definite correlation. So we're going to talk about that. So I have a lot to cover today. It is going to go by so fast, these next 50 minutes. It's going to fly by. So I have to keep it really, really high level. We'll see what we get into in the Q&A. But when I think about my objectives today, I hope everyone here, when you leave, you're more excited, you're more energized, you're more invested in thinking about mental health as part of your overall benefit strategy. That is the main goal. To do that, I'm absolutely going to talk about the proof points. We're going to spend a little bit of time, first, going over what are the impacts on mental health, what are we seeing in our employees, and then what are the business benefits of investing in mental well-being. That's really key. And then we'll talk about some of those mental health benefits, right? What are they? Some of them you're going to already have in place, but I want to talk about how do you maximize them? How do you get the most out of those benefits? And then some of the things I'm going to talk about, maybe new strategies, new things for you to think about and consider. And then, of course, we're going to talk a little bit about communication strategy. I'm curious during the Q&A, I'd love to hear, by the way, if you have questions, great. But if you're doing any innovative solutions, if you're bringing something new, please share it with your colleagues. And then also, are you having any interesting success with how you communicate to increase utilization, right? Because you can have the best benefits out there, but if your employees don't know about it and they don't utilize it, it's all for naught, right? Okay, so we need to get started. I have a lot to cover. But before we do, you might have noticed a slide that I put up here on this very large screen while I was doing my introduction. It was purposeful because I wanted to start today with a really feel-good slide, right? One that makes us feel warm and fuzzy inside. That's what you guys feel, right, when you see this? Yeah? Right? Has anyone gotten a chance to read some of these words up here? Show of hands, thumbs up. Have you read it? Awesome. How are you guys feeling right now, looking at this screen? Shout it out. Stressed, anxious, scared, someone said? Scared? Anything else from this side? There's no right or wrong answer. You could say numb, seen it, status quo. What about this side of the room? How are you feeling when you see this slide? Frustrated. Thank you. You guys didn't know I was going to make you participate. Don't forget, y'all, I am a psychologist. I need interaction. So I'm going to expect that today. I need that. It's kind of like Christian was saying he needs validation. Like, I need to talk to people. So you guys have to do that for me? Absolutely, right? And I put this on here not to make us feel scared or depressed or anxious. That's not my goal. But really, it's to set the context of why we find ourselves here today, right? Why are we here where this is now a mental wellness is a business imperative? And absolutely, it is because of the last 3.5 years, right? The mental health pandemic. We all in this room, including our employees, we have been bombarded by community trauma after community trauma, right? One after the other, on top of all of the stressors we all just face in our normal lives, right? So when we think about the pandemic and we think about grief and loss, it seems like there's one natural disaster after the other, right? With loss of life, gun violence, every week, right? There's something with gun violence, inflation, financial anxiety, global uncertainty, the war in Ukraine. It just goes on and on and on. So it's no wonder that we find ourselves here. Okay, and I know I said I'm going to talk about mental wellness on a really high level. So before I get into it, I want to start with some case studies, right? I want to humanize this because we're going to talk at such a high level. I don't want folks to forget who are the individual people that we care about. Why are we even talking about these benefits? Why are we investing, right, money and resources and time? Who are the individuals? How are we going to make this impact? So, meet Derek. Derek is promoted to a higher position in his organization, but instead of feeling excited and proud of his accomplishments, he starts feeling stressed and anxious. And recently, he underwent knee surgery from an old college injury, but before his promotion, he was going to physical therapy, he was compliant, he enjoyed it, he was getting better, but since his promotion, he stopped going. He feels like he can't focus on his health, he's starting to gain weight, he's overwhelmed by his mental state and his productivity is suffering, and he even considers leaving his employer. So by show of hands, raise your hand if you think you could have a Derek at some point in your organization. Could this happen to you? A little bit higher so I can see. Yeah, almost everybody, right? And we can help Derek, right? We can help him with his stress. We can help him with his anxiety. We can give him resources so he doesn't feel overwhelmed, so he can be successful in his promotion, and he can be productive, and he can make the impact we want. Or maybe you have an Emily, right? So Emily's the mom of a 4-year-old who just gave birth to her second child. She's also feeling very overwhelmed. She's worried about getting back to work. And in addition, her mother needs help and moves in with her. So now you have Emily who finds herself torn between her work duties, parenting, caregiving, and then to complicate matters, it seems like she might have symptoms of postpartum depression. All of this impacting her work performance. So again, by show of hands, raise your hand if you think you could have an Emily in your organization. Right? All of us. And again, we can help Emily. There are benefits out there, right, that we can provide to her to help with her postpartum depression, to help with her caregiving stress, to help with her parenting struggles, so that she can have a much more positive mental well-being, but also focus and be productive at work, right, which is very important to us. So today, we're talking about mental health, but I also wanted to point out before we get into, really, really specific, that pillar, that column, that dimension, that there are multiple dimensions when we think about benefits, wellness benefits, that funnel in to an employee's overall well-being, right? So there's physical health, social connectedness, job satisfaction, financial security, all of that funnels in. And we know through research that when organizations take a much more modal approach, right, a multi-dimensional approach to well-being, that's where you're going to see the most impact. So I love that we had the previous talk when we think about physical health, that's so important. They all funnel into well-being, so we want to think about them all. But also what I wanted to point out here is that they are all interconnected, right? They funnel into each other. And so just like when we were learning about autoimmune disease, we noticed psychiatric disorders come up. You guys mentioned counseling, right, as something that can be helpful. We know when someone has a physical illness, it impacts their mental health, right? And vice versa, right? So if you're doing things to support their physical health, you're going to help their mental well-being as well, right? So that's important. Same with social connectedness, right? If someone has social support in the workplace, we know through research that if you have kind of your best work friend, that work colleague, you're more happy at work, you're more productive at work. Do you guys have your besties at work, right? Yeah, so it's our hands. Makes a huge difference. Even with retention, people don't leave when they have their people, right? And we know that that improves their mental wellness as well. So it's interconnected. So Just again, by show of hands, when you guys are thinking about your overall benefit strategy, raise your hand if you're thinking about, more than one of these modes, one of these dimensions. Awesome, right? Hopefully you're thinking about all of them. So I am curious though, if I forced you to pick one dimension that is your primary focus as you're sitting there at the table thinking about benefit strategies, thinking about your budget, and you're not gonna hurt my feelings if you don't pick mental health, by the way. These are all important. Raise your hand if you're focusing, more 2023, 2024 on physical health. That's your primary, okay? What about mental health? A few more hands. Okay, for time's sake, what about the other three? Raise your hand if it's social, connected, job satisfaction, financial. I don't think everyone raised their hands, but there was a mix, right? It's hard for me to tell which one's winning out. I can tell you that the Business Group on Health, they do a survey, thousands of respondents every year. They ask this question. They ask the employers, when you think about your wellness strategy, what are the various dimensions that you're including for 2022 and 2023? And the good news is, as I said, right, multiple dimensions is most important. These were not mutually exclusive. People could pick more than one. They did, right? Mental health was at the top, but financial wellness, physical health, they were there as well, right at the top. But when they were asked and forced to say, okay, which one's your primary? Now you have to pick one. What do you think it was? What do you guys think? Why am I smiling? Mental health blew the other ones out of the water, right? Blew it out of the water. That's why I'm here today. That's why I'm talking about it. And it makes sense when we look at the state of mental health in America. I have US stats. Global stats are similar for those who have global organizations in the audience today, right? We know, continuing on even into 2023, the most recent data, that 1 in 5 Americans, right, at any given time meet criteria for a mental health condition, depression, anxiety. So we have 200 people here today, 40 of us. If this room follows that statistic, 40 of us today have clinically significant symptoms that meet criteria for a mental health condition. Okay? That's pretty significant. And over half don't receive treatment. And out of those who say they need treatment and who would want treatment, almost 30% don't get it because they say they couldn't afford it. So think about the impacts, right, that we have as employers if we bring those services and those benefits to our employees, where they can access it for free, right, or affordably through their employer. Think about the amazing impacts we have on that individual's quality of life, on their resilience, right, on their overall wellness, and then think about the business impacts. When we eliminate, right, those symptoms and those stressors, how much better they're going to be able to focus on their job, okay? Now, this is mental health, depression, anxiety. Now, 4 out of 5 at any given time of us don't meet that, right? We don't meet that criteria. But what about just stress, right? Moderate to severe significant stress. I'm not going to put anyone on the spot, but if I asked all of us, like thinking over the past year, how many of us had a notable period of time where we felt stressed at work, right? Where it maybe even have impacted us in some way, our sleep, our well-being. There's a lot more of us that are gonna raise our hands. And in fact, statistically, it's quadrupled. Over 80%, right, of employees say they experience work stress. And these numbers floor me. I think there's a lot of folks in here that probably work with stats more than I do, but stress causes around 1 million workers to miss work every day. Did you guys know that before I read this? That's crazy to me, right? That number, oh my goodness. And US businesses lose up to $300 billion yearly because of workplace stress, right? That's huge. Also some other stats, I'm not gonna read them all. The ones I bolded are not more important, they're just my reading points, by the way, the ones I wanted to share today. 40% of workers say that they're on the verge of burnout. And everyone in this room knows the difference between stress and burnout. Burnout is where, we're not in a good place when we have employees saying burnout. 40%, right, in this particular WorkHuman survey. And not surprisingly, the exact same statistic, 40% would like better mental health benefits, right? Almost 60% of employees surveyed said healthy work-life balance was more important than their financial compensation. That surprised me. And over a third believe that mental health benefits are more important than higher pay or their salary. That surprised me as well, right? So this is why, this is the business imperative. This is why I'm talking about this today. We need this to take care of our employees, and we need it so we keep our employees, right? So we retain our good talent, for sure. Okay, so hopefully everyone's with me, right? The data is clear. We have a lot of individuals, a lot of employees who are impacted by mental health conditions, by stress, right? And it absolutely impacts the workplace, right? Financially, in many ways. So then it begs the question, well, if we invest our money and part of our budget into mental health benefits, does it make a difference, right? Is it worth it? Is that where we should invest? And the answer is absolutely yes. So I'm not gonna read this slide. I know there's like way too many words that like defy PowerPoint laws, but I put it on here because I know you guys are going to have access to this, and I wanted you to see specific study results, right? Specific studies that looked at, we implemented this mental health program, this resource, this benefit, and what were the business outcomes on the flip side. I made a much more pretty slide to summarize it. I love making PowerPoints, by the way. This is how I express my artistic creation at work, and then at home it's cheese plates, if anyone cares. That's how I'm like, this grape needs to move a little bit over. Okay, but investment in mental health resources, we know that it significantly improves retention, or reduces turnover, however you want to look at it. It increases productivity. They reduce absenteeism and presenteeism, right? So absenteeism being not coming to work, presenteeism being I'm at work, but I'm not focused, right? My mind is elsewhere, I'm not productive. They improve job performance, they reduce healthcare costs, and they improve overall quality of life and life satisfaction scores of our employees. So pretty significant. Okay. Next learning objective. Hopefully, that was kind of a fast and furious business benefits, data proof points, but hopefully we are all in agreement that investing in mental wellness is just good business. Yeah, show of hands, agreed? Good business, makes sense. We know that, thank you guys, thank you for, I remember when Christian's like, I need validation. I'm like, I need hands. I need to communicate, right? All right, so we're all on board. So now let's start talking about some of the mental health benefits. How do you make an impact? What are things you can do? What can you bring to your employees to support their mental wellness? The first thing I'm absolutely going to talk about is more of a prevention. It is creating that culture of mental well-being. Right, so before we even talk about vendor partners or other solutions, what are you doing at home, right? Really true benefits when it comes to mental health, it starts from within, and nothing's going to support your employees' mental health like having that open, supportive, and inclusive workplace culture that really says we care about your mental wellness, right? And it's in the policies, and it's in the relationships, and it's in how the team leaders manage their teams. All of this coming together. This slide could be its own talk. How do you build a culture to support mental health, right? We could spend a lot of time on this, but I think topics that have really been coming up recently, obviously, are flexible work policies, right? There's a lot now. People are at the table talking about, do we return to work? How do we return people to work? Do we allow people to continue to work from home? If we want them to come back, is it hybrid? And if they have to be at work 2 or 3 days, do they get to pick the days? Those are important conversations. What are you doing to build social support and community? Do you have team building exercises? Are there opportunities to volunteer together? Are you involving employees in decision making? Are you encouraging or even requiring your team leads to do regular check-ins, right? Where once a month, they're touching point with their teammates and saying, how are you doing, right? All good? How's your stress level? How's your work-life balance? Are you satisfied with the work you're doing? Do we have the right growth opportunities? Whatever that conversation is. Are there opportunities for rewards and recognition? And are you training your teammates? Are you training your employees, right, on the tools they need to maintain a positive mental state? I'm gonna talk way too much on training for like the next 5 minutes. You guys are gonna be like, oh, I don't wanna hear more about training. But the reason I bring it up is I think it's an untapped resource. I don't think we as organizations do enough training, because we sit here and we say, I wanna have a resilient organization. I want to have a resilient workforce. I want to have employees that can kind of go through change and go through a crisis or a difficult situation and come out unscathed and have the tools to cope. I want to have managers, right? I want to have team leaders that create this positive mental health culture, that know how to have conversations around mental health, that can have performance conversations. But how do we have that if you are not equipping your team with that knowledge, with those tools, with those resources, right? We can't just assume that folks are going to come in with this knowledge. So I think training is really, really important. And some organizations, they nail it. They nail it. I mean, they have their training calendar. They're really including topics on mental health. And then others, we have some growth and opportunity there. So these are just some titles, from CompPsych. Depending on what organization you work with, there may be difference. These were just ones I pulled from our training list that I think are really, really worthwhile to give some examples, right? So for all employees, coping with the traumatic event, moving through grief and loss, coping during uncertain times. Also thinking about what are the stressors of your organization, right? So like if it's retail, responding to distressed customers. What are the things that kind of lead towards that burnout? What are the things that cause stress for your employees? Are you training them with the tools on how to manage those, right? That's a huge preventative measure that we can do to support mental wellness. And then same with managers, right? We hear a lot around psychological safety. Do they know what that is? Do they know how to create, psychological safety in the workplace? Do they know how to prevent employee burnout? Do they have mental health awareness, right? Do they know how to support their teams through stressful situations? And then also, addressing employee performance issues in a supportive way. This is tough for managers. You have an employee, right, that's having a performance issues, but then discloses a life stressor or a mental health issue. I've been very depressed. And if managers don't have training, that's a very difficult situation for them, right? To figure out how do they navigate that? How do they navigate it well, where they can manage that performance issue, but still come across as supportive and being able to give those resources, right? And then training your managers on all of the various benefits you have that can impact mental health and well-being. This is so important. Managers, team leads, they're going to drive one of the sources to drive your utilization. Because they're talking to their teams, hopefully. They know about their teammates. They know what's going on in their life. If someone says, oh, it's been so stressful. My mother-in-law broke her hip, and we had to figure out where she's about to leave the hospital, where she's going to go. We don't know if she should come to a facility near us or my sister-in-law, and it's just been really chaotic trying to figure all this out. Does the team lead notice, say, oh my gosh, Sherry, I'm so sorry to hear that, but did you know that the EAP, they have elder care specialists that can help you, find the rehab locations, they can help you with resources. You may want to reach out to them. Just all those opportunities, right, to support your employees, to give them that information, and then absolutely, above and beyond kind of those preventative conversations, if they have someone struggling who comes to them and says, which we want, right? That's part of mental health culture. We want people to come to have that true open door policy where someone can say, hey, I need to talk to you, right? I'm having a hard time. I want to work this out. Do they have, not only that training to have that conversation, but that toolbox? Because managers and team leads, we have to keep boundaries. They're not therapists, right? They shouldn't be diagnosing, treating, having like counseling sessions, right? They need to support that employee and say, I'm sorry you're going through this. I have these tools for you. Here are the resources. And we know through research that employees feel a lot more comfortable having those conversations when they're trained and when they have that toolbox where they just don't feel alone, they have solutions, right? So this is so important. And so often, I'm on the call with customers and they're calling us to say, hey, we have this situation or we're looking to support this initiative, can you be part of it? And we're like, yeah, we have A, B, C, D, and these are all resources you have. And they're like, oh my God, I didn't even know that. And I'm like, you're like the benefits, lead. If you don't know that you have access to these services and these support, and people are laughing, and these supports, how do the team leads and how do your employees, right? So it's so important that managers have this training on what the resources are, including training, what resources they have for themselves. All right, so I just put two examples here, management consults and CISM, critical incident and stress management. My organization, our customers, they have unlimited access to management consults. So this is great for that situation I was talking about earlier, where a team lead says, I have this individual, there's a performance issue, but they disclose some type of mental health concern. I'm feeling a little bit unsure how to address the situation, how to have this conversation, it's great to be able to have a consult with an expert to kind of walk through the best practices. And then also when there is a critical event, something traumatic, something significant that impacts their teams, do they know, how, when and how to access CISM support, which at least for me is, having a licensed clinician go on site or virtually, whatever makes sense for the organization, to support the employees. So the manager is not alone, right? That there's someone that can be there to talk about how do you cope? What's the normal reaction after a stressful event? Sometimes it's group debriefings. Sometimes it's having a therapist sit in a room for the day for individuals to come in, right? And just kind of check in and support, but they're not alone. In my organization, we did over 10,000 CISM events last year. 10,000. I don't know about you guys, I'm like really impressed by that number because it's so many, but I'm also saddened because think about the number of events where employees were impacted, whether it's the biggest one is grief, right? An unexpected loss of a colleague, sometimes things like that, but violence, gun violence, natural disasters, it impacts your employees. And we want to come in, we want to step in early and support them, right? So we can build resilience and we can reduce some of the negative after effects. So do managers know they have that? Last slide on training, I swear. I promise it's the last slide on training. But just some tips, right? Because I do have organizations we work for, again, so with EAP, traditionally we give our customers a bucket of hours. They have a bucket of training hours that they can use throughout the year. Right? And some of our organizations, they use them. They take advantage. They're giving their employees tools, right? Resources, education. And then we have some that don't use them. Raise your hand if you know this, if your organization has some training hours with a vendor that you work with. Okay? And raise your hand if you feel like you're maximizing the use of those hours, or if you want, raise your hand if you think you could do better. Okay, more. Yeah, so then this is a good slide for you. I'm happy I put it in, even though I know people are like, enough about training. Okay, so ideas to use them, right? Because absolutely, in certain industries, you can't pull people. They're retail, they're on the floor. It's an hourly position. Healthcare, we just heard, right? We know there's a huge shortages of nurse. We can't pull them for an hour training. There's not enough of them to do their job and care for the patient. So I understand that. So where can you use those hours? How can you build that resilience, right? How can you support mental health? Do it as part of your onboarding training, right? You have all this onboarding, it's how to do the job, but what about putting in 2 or 3 hours on mental health awareness, coping skills, resiliency building? Again, if you know there's something that causes stress or burnout, do you have a training on it? Like how do you manage distressed customers, right? And absolutely train your managers and team leads. Train them so they can facilitate that culture, so they can support mental well-being, so they're comfortable talking about that. And here's the key. We do a really good job at having orientations if we pull someone from outside the organization, but how many of you have real orientations and trainings when you internally promote a team lead? Do you? Raise your hand if anyone has hey, congratulations on your promotion to team lead. We're gonna pull you for 3 days and do some orientation and training. No, because they're just expected. They know, right? They know the job, they knew the organization, they were doing the job of that team, so now they're just managing it. But again, they might not have training on how to be a manager or a team lead, right? So we have to equip them. So use those trainings during those times, right? Use those training hours if you're not using them. Raise your hand if you have ERG groups. I'm going to talk about those, right? Employee resource groups. If you do, they're hungry for things to do during their monthly meetings to offer, right, their members. Offer them some of the training hours. That's like a gift to the ERG groups. That's going to get to your employees, right? You can provide on-demand trainings and plan, if you have, for example, with our organization, connect with your account manager, right? And plan your trainings for the year, at least some of them. Because you all know in this room, the days, the weeks, the month, the year goes by so fast. And you're not going to use those trainings. But if you sit down at the beginning of the year and you think about monthly awareness, activities or themes or initiatives that your company is doing, you can plan trainings around those and get them on the book so you don't miss that opportunity. Okay. You guys excited to kind of go back to your organizations and think about training? Or did I traumatize you? You're like, I don't want to hear that word again. Okay, next, EAP. I'm going to talk about leaning into your EAP for mental wellness. I know I seem biased. It's not because I work for an EAP. It's because most companies have an EAP as their main source to connect people to counseling services and other mental health services. So what I want to talk about today is those best practices. How do you make sure, you are thinking about your EAP in a way that your employees are going to access, utilize, and get the most benefits out of it? 84% of large U.S. employers in private sector and 90% in the public sector have an EAP. And the good news is, for those of you that, again, want proof points, like, putting your money where your mouth is, does it work? Yes, right? Consistently in all research studies, there are positive outcomes, right? A really good return on investment, an ROI in EAP, particularly for counseling services. Really, counseling services tends to be the highest utilization than some of the others, but really as a whole. And so we know, this was a 2022 paper, was looking at 2020 data, but using the Workplace Outcome Suite. So that's a very reliable, validated measure that looks at these various outcomes you see here on the left, kind of pre and post, right? So you do the pre-measure, then you do some type of intervention, in this case it's EAP counseling, and then you look at the results at the end. And EAP counseling significantly reduces work presenteeism, absenteeism, lost productive time, workplace distress, and improves work engagement and life satisfaction. And in 2022, the ROI for EAP counseling services was $5 to 1, which I think is fantastic. And they found that on average, only 1% to 2% of employees need to use the EAP counseling to yield enough savings in work productivity outcomes to break even on the cost of that budget. And usually it is multiple times higher than that, right? It really depends on the organization. There's a range of utilization. A lot of it comes from your communication strategy, your culture, but it's much, much higher than that. So let's talk about some best practices when it comes to EAP counseling services, right? So if you have an EAP, I want you guys to think about your program. Does it flow like this? If you don't, and you're thinking about that as part of your strategy, and you're meeting with different organizations as part of a proposal, this is what you want to be thinking about. We want to meet our employees where they're at. We know that through research. That is what's most important, right? Are there multiple ways to access care, to engage in care? I mean, are we meeting their preferences, their needs? That's what we need to do to actually encourage use and increase utilization. So starting with access, are there various paths to connect depending on your employees' preferences? Right? When we think about generational differences, cohort differences. So for example, can they call and speak to somebody, right? Is there a live person to speak to connect with, to do an assessment, to give them recommendations, right? Is that available? We're seeing a lot of digital solutions today, just online only. That's great for some employees, but some are still gonna wanna speak to someone. Flip it to the other end of the pendulum. There are some employees who don't wanna talk to anybody. They wanna pull out their phone, they wanna go online, find a provider, book and confirm an appointment. Great. Is that option available? And anything in between. Does someone just kind of want to dip their toe in, ask a question, send an email and get a response? Do they want to talk to someone, but not on the phone, they're busy? Do they want a live chat, right? Do they want to go online or look at the application? What are the paths to access that service? The more you have, right? We don't want to make it obviously overwhelming, but the more you have to meet different preferences, the more likely people are going to access care, right? And then once they've accessed care, are there multiple modalities to get counseling services? Again, we're seeing a lot of new organizations that are digital only, telehealth only. It makes sense, right, from an access perspective, right? That's great. You have providers that can see people all over the state. And I will say that we're all a little bit more comfortable with telehealth since we were forced to do it for 3 years. But I am absolutely seeing that pendulum shift back to folks wanting in-person counseling. I do call monitoring. I just like to join in. So we have call monitoring where we can listen to calls just for quality. And I like to listen in as the clinical director to see how our master's level clinicians are doing on those calls, how empathic is the call. And I remember the first time I was doing it, I thought for sure most people would still want telehealth because I love that. I'm like, oh, I'm busy. I'm a mom of a 6 and a 4-year-old. If I can cut out commute time, anything that saves time, I am all about it. Do you know that first hour I listened in, every single caller said they wanted in person? I was so surprised. And what's interesting is not only do they want in person, but they actually want hybrid, That's what I'm seeing today, right? So they want an in-person counselor who's local so they can go in person, meet that individual, get that connection, know that they're available for in-person if and when they want it, but they also ask, well, do they also offer telehealth? So on weeks where it's not convenient to go in person, they can switch, right? So do they have that? And then with telehealth, is it video? Is it phone? Is it chat counseling? We want to have those options. So again, if someone has a preference, you have that preference so they tap into that service. And then are they able to select the provider's characteristics, right? This is another thing we know through research that is so important to success, right? That fit of that provider. So, do they prefer a male or female? Do they want a provider of a particular race or ethnicity? Do they want someone who works with the LGBTQ plus community? Do they want someone of a particular faith or that speaks a specific language? This becomes really important, right? To making sure that they access and utilize the service. And then ask your EAP vendor, how do they handle clinically urgent and risk situations? Do they have a process in place? And I say this because EAPs, we're not crisis centers. We're not meant to be a crisis call center, but people absolutely call in crisis, right? And they call with more clinically urgent situations. Years ago, EAP, I think people really did just tap into it for kind of low acuity stress issues. They went to the health plan, they found a community provider for something more long term. We know today with the access issues, folks are having a hard time finding a provider. Many people are calling and utilizing the EAP at a higher acuity. So we want to make sure that your EAP, they can handle those urgent and risk situations, and there's a process to get your employees care faster if needed. Right, that's so important. And then the last thing to consider at counseling is I see a lot of organizations now increasing their counseling sessional model, right? So it used to be pre-pandemic, it was really common to have 3 to 5 sessions, right? Low acuity issues, quick issues to talk about and help find, resolutions and solutions. Now, as employers are really wanting to support mental health more comprehensively as we realize more of our employees were going through this mental health pandemic, right, over the past few years. We want to give them more resources. We're seeing that sessional model move more to like 5 to 8 sessions. And this is what's interesting about this, and I really actually like that 5 to 8 sessional model. By the way, we have some organizations that do 10, 12. They are outliers for sure, but we have some that absolutely give even higher sessional counts. When we think about resolution rates, so in my organization, we talk about resolutions rate. What it means is the percentage of cases that are referred on for additional support through the health plan, right, or other community resources after those EAP sessions are used up. And at a 3 sessional model, it's sometimes 50% are referred on. That makes sense, right, guys? Because if there's a higher acuity issue, it's hard to give that person all the tools they need and resolve that issue in 3 sessions. When you start to get to 8 sessions, almost 90%, more than 90% are resolved in the EAP sessional model, right? Where they don't have to go on into their health plan. So that's something to think about as well. Okay. Also, when you think about leaning into your EAP to help mental well-being is thinking about continuum of care, right? Not every person wants to speak to a licensed mental health provider, for better or for worse. Maybe there's stigma, maybe they don't think they need it, maybe they just don't need it. It's a lower acuity issue, but they care about their mental health, right? They want to build resilience. They realize that, they can benefit from learning coping skills. So are there other services that get people engaged in their mental health to give them tools, right, to cope with all these stressors we're dealing with? So one example is well-being coaching. We're seeing this more and more. It's something my organization provides. Well-being coaching, this is really for the lower acuity issues, right? Avoiding burnout, stress management, work-life balance, self-esteem, self-compassion, also your traditional healthy living goals, weight management, right? Exercising, physical activity. So that's really a great kind of, more approachable sometimes care for individuals who just kind of want to step into their self-care but don't necessarily want to meet with a counselor. And then CCBT, computerized cognitive behavioral therapy. I didn't finish that sentence, right? So these are the applications you're seeing. There's many out there. right? But this is where someone can kind of do a self-guided journey to their mental well-being. There's usually modules on reducing depression, reducing anxiety, reducing stress, sleep, improving their sleep, self-esteem, all different types of modules and information, mindfulness, right? All of those good things. And in some organizations, they take kind of a tiered approach. So they might do an assessment and then stick someone into like a particular continuum category based on the severity. I know at ComPsych, these are not mutually exclusive, right? They're available. So if someone is more likely to utilize one or access one more than the other, great, they have it. But you could have someone that's in counseling for their anxiety, working with a well-being coach for their weight management, because they're trying to get healthy, and downloading and using their CCBT app in between. Talk about like wrapping them in that mental health service love blanket, right? They got everything there, which is fantastic. And then I want everyone to consider your mental wellness benefits, whether or not they meet the needs of your diverse employee workforce. And we can look at this a couple of different ways. We can look at it based on generation cohorts. We can look at it based on demographic characteristics, DE&I. But this is important, right? Because we want to definitely make sure that, again, when we think about needs, when we think about preferences, we're having resources that meet what is relevant, what is meaningful to each of your employees. So when I think about this, is obviously very high level generalizations, but baby boomers, a big theme is bereavement, right? It's loss. We start to see loved ones pass. Sometimes it's caregiving for someone. These are the stressors. So are there counseling services aimed at supporting them? Are there other work-life services that can assist, right? Retirement planning, the anxiety around it, are there resources around that so we can reduce their stress so they can be more focused at work because their mind isn't elsewhere on these different stressors, right? Gen X, relationships, parenting stress, caregiving stress. Have you guys heard the term, like the phrase, the sandwich generation? So that is where you have someone who's caring for children and for an adult, right? Usually like an older loved one, right? That is so stressful. They are sandwiched in between those caregiving duties. So are there resources for that? Obviously, in terms of counseling, mental health, but caregiving support, parenting support. Millennials, Gen Zs, lots of financial anxieties, right? Crippling student loans, can't buy a home, all of these stressors. Do we have resources for that? And then absolutely considering culturally responsive services for your diverse employees when it comes to demographics. This also, DE&I, this is a whole topic on itself. I have one slide. This is not going to do it justice. But demographics continue to play a strong role in mental health. So when we look at the 2021 Mindshare Partner Study, more than 50% of respondents said mental health is a DEI issue. They're completely interconnected. And this is the respondents of the survey, but younger workers, so millennials and Gen Zs, self-identified LGBTQ+, Black and Latinx respondents were all significantly more likely to experience mental health symptoms. They were all more likely to leave roles for mental health, and they all were more likely to believe that a company should support mental health. And so what's important is that you don't just have like a DEI statement, right? But that you have purposeful actions, purposeful resources that consider, right, your diverse employees. So for example, at ComPsych, we get asked a lot to do what we call guidance sessions. These are small employee groups, right? So it's employees all at the same organization that have a shared experience so they can process that experience, they can talk about how it impacts them, they can learn coping skills, and we get asked to do it specifically sometimes for their BIPOC providers, their Black and brown providers. After George Floyd's death, for example, we were having these small groups. So purposeful resources, that are aimed at your diverse employees. Another thing is ERG groups, right? And not a lot of hands went up, but I know a lot of organizations we work with have ERG groups. So these are groups who are employees of, again, self-identified characteristic, whether it's sexual orientation, race or ethnicity, parental status. They can come together to support one another, to not feel alone, to not feel isolated, to encourage each other with resources, with mental health support. So that's another great opportunities to support your diverse employees as well. And then not forgetting to think about the whole person, right? So again, I'm focusing on kind of these mental health strategies, so counseling, well-being coaching, CCBT, but we definitely want to think about all the various services we have that can reduce someone's stress, right? that is going to impact their mental well-being, and it's going to help them focus at work and be more productive, be more satisfied, right? So things like, and this is why I say leading to your EAP, financial consults, legal consults, being able to talk to an elder care expert, a child care expert. For example, if we get a call, relationships are a big thing. So if we get a call in my organization, someone says they're going through a divorce and they're calling us to get counseling services. It's been really difficult emotionally. Absolutely, we're going to connect them to a counselor. But as part of that conversation, we're going to ask them, would you like to speak to one of our attorneys? Do you have any legal questions? If their financial situation has changed, we're going to say, would you like to speak to one of our financial experts? Can we answer any questions for you? If their parenting situation has changed, right? That's something important as well. Can we help them with childcare? All of those good things. Same, with physical health. Thinking about sleep improvement programs, tobacco cessation, weight management, diabetes. And then finally, are there other newer mental health opportunities and resources? I say newer, these are not new. We've been doing these forever, right? But I'm seeing more people invest in them. So I see a lot in the news today around mental health days, kind of companies putting their money where their mouth is. We believe in mental health. We believe in work-life balance. We're going to give you these 2 days to kind of just take care of yourself. On-site services are becoming more important. So on-site services, we have been placing dedicated EAP counselors in organizations for 15, 20 years, but I'm getting more requests for this. This is where you have a dedicated counselor that goes to your key locations just for your employees. And what's great about the on-site EAP counselors is that not only can they do counseling, but they can do trainings, right? They can do management consults. They can support CISM. They can, work with your ERG group. So take advantage of that. If you're doing a temporary mobile clinic for flu vaccines and things like that, bring in your counselor. Let them do depression screenings, like engage in mental health. And then peer networks. You support a network with a network, right? So I'm seeing more and more organizations have these peer champions that are trained on how to support their peers, de-escalate a situation and say, hey, I know this is tough. Here are the resources. They know the benefits. Nothing's going to promote your services like a peer. And they're called different things, right? Mental health allies, mental health champions. We have a 4-hour certification program at ComPsych for well-being coaches. So this is something you can do, right? Absolutely, to support the mental well-being of your employees. And then last but not least, engagement and communication strategies. I'm really curious when we get to the Q&A if you guys have any creative strategies. You can't just talk about your benefits, right? At the beginning of the year when it's time to renew benefits, you can't just give people the number to your EAP and call it a day. And even regular emails, kind of once a month reminders, nobody looks at them. Our email box are cluttered. So what are your creative solutions? Mailers are great, digital wallet cards, I see those, right? But maybe getting more creative, like focusing on work-life promotions. If you have parents, if you have caregivers, do a promotion around that. People are gonna hone in because it's meaningful to them, right? It's something that's important to them, and then you can talk about the various benefits. Use your ERG groups, use your peer champions, regularly schedule trainings, but think about things that are important to your business initiatives, right? If DE&I is important, if caregiving is important, bring in those resources then, and absolutely vendor integration. Increase partnership and cross-referring, right, is huge to get that utilization up. Like one example, if you have a short-term disability or an FMLA carrier, they should be putting information about your EAP in every packet that goes out, right? If someone's taking FMLA to care for, a loved one, we want to make sure we know how difficult that is. We know the stress. Do they know how to access counseling? Do they know how that they can talk to an elder care specialist? We want to have that vendor integration. A lot of folks are doing vendor summits. I think that's really smart. Raise your hand if you do vendor summits. Not too many, but that's a great way to do vendor integration for sure. And then this is my last slide. I think I have a minute and a half left, right? So, okay. All right, so I started with talking about culture, right? That was the first thing. We have to create a culture around mental wellness. And so I kind of wanted it to come full circle and end on this idea of stigma busting, okay? This is so important. If you want to improve your employees' mental wellness, if you want to create that culture, together, collectively, we have to stigma bust. We know even with the mental health pandemic and all of the news saying, oh, like stigma's gone down, still in recent studies, 3/4 of employers still say there's mental health stigma in their organization, and it's highest in the C-suite. and the executives, because we say that we believe in like mental wellness. We want this culture. We want it for employees, but we don't talk about it, right? Because we don't want to be seen as weak. We don't want to think people to think we can't do our jobs. We're very closed off, even though we know if leaders are vulnerable, if team leads talk about their struggle with work-life balance, with stress, that is going to set that culture and normalize it for everybody else. That it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to utilize these services. It's okay. We're going to help each other build resilience. So these are just some strategies, right, to kind of stigma bust that I want you to take away today. Training, of course, training, right? But encouraging role modeling by leaders, talking about their own mental well-being challenges, empowering employees to address stigma through advocates, through the ERG groups, right? Through those peer networks, regularly normalizing the resources. A great strategy too is, think about, and I realize I'm to Q&A, but I'm almost done. Yeah, is rebranding your EAP, right? And I'm from an EAP. We don't use that. We use it with our customers because it's the lingo that we use, right? But when someone calls, when an employee calls, we don't say EAP, we don't say ComPsych. We say, at my organization, you've reached guidance resources. But if an organization wants us to use something else, you've reached Smith & Smith Wellness Program. We'll use that, right? So we don't want it to seem like roboticized, or outdated. We want people to be energized. So think about that culture, think about that messaging. And a great way to destigmatize is start with sleep. For whatever reason, people love talking about sleep. There's no stigma associated with it. Even C-suites are like, oh my God, I get no sleep, and I know it weighs on my mental health, and it's really, really difficult. So you can do these sleep campaigns and these sleep discussions, and then secretly, it's like the gateway, it's like the gateway drug, it's like the gateway into discussions about more kind of sensitive mental health topics. So it's a great tip. If you haven't started the destigmatizing of mental health, start with sleep. All right, I went into 30 seconds over, so I know it's time for Q&A, but I hope everyone here is like, yeah, mental wellness. I'm gonna go back to my organization, we're gonna talk about resources, and hopefully that's the outcome I did today. But thank you guys, open for Q&A.
So the data that you presented regarding return on investment was from 2020. Did you look at any other years? Because that was a kind of an unusual year with the pandemic.
It is higher. You're so good. It's like, I remember we were just like learning about statistics and like the loopholes. I put the highest one. So that one, 2019 and 2020 were both on there, but for impact, I put 2020, it was like 5-1. I think 2019 was like 4 something. It wasn't much lower. It's always high, but you're right. 2020 was a little bit higher because more people did tap into EAP counseling. So very sharp perception there. But even in other years, like even before the pandemic, return on investment is very strong for counseling services. Great question. And you can look up like that study, if you look up Workplace Outcome Suite, you can go back and pull all the annual reports.
I had a question. Do you think things got worse from a mental health standpoint during the pandemic? Or do you just think everyone, for some reason, became more comfortable in raising their hand and saying, and therefore the two are just correlative, not causal? Because it seemed like just this wave hit everyone.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you sense is that just people that got slightly more comfortable?
It's both. We definitely saw increases in mental illness, right? And that makes sense when you think about the isolation, the fear, the trauma, especially with employees. Think about certain industries that were really impacted, healthcare. It was, the stress of that time, people getting sick, the sheer number of losses, death of loved ones. It was just this like tsunami of loss and fear. So the numbers did go up because of all of the impacts of the pandemic for sure. However, at the same time, because of that, even if you were not impacted, which I think most of us would say, even if, again, we don't meet clinically significant symptoms, we all felt that stress, that fear, that anxiety, the impacts of isolation. You knew someone who did, right? Someone in your household, a close friend, a colleague, you saw them going through this intense emotional impact. So that completely increased awareness and destigmatized it, because it wasn't just some foreign person, right? Like, oh, other people have these mental health issues. It's like, recognizing that everyday people can have these symptoms. And it doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean anything negative. It happens. right? There's stress in our lives, and we're humans. And again, it's okay to be not okay. So I think it's both. So yes, definitely an increase, but all of that is what actually led to, I'm not okay too, right? Absolutely. It's a great question.
Obviously the EAP benefit compared to other benefits, lower utilization typically across the board, very positive. I would say seeing that 1 to 2% of employees utilizing it, will break even. I think that's positive, a positive message for us, back to our leadership. But the industry that we work in for the Timken company is heavily dominated by an older population, a male population, and it's manufacturing, which we know just from a communication perspective, it's hard to reach, it's hard to get them engaged, and thinking about utilizing this type of service because of that stigma. From a manufacturing population, the demographics that I just said, any recommendations on, how to get people comfortable, how to get people using it, or avenues to go down just to make the benefit more accessible?
Yeah, it's a great question. I know that our account managers, they do a lot with like industry specific communications and strategies. So they'll do that, whether it's healthcare or manufacturing, and they'll think about what is important. And this is, I didn't talk about it, but it was one of the bullet points. When you want to kind of increase utilization, thinking about what is meaningful to your employees. So if it's financial stuff, right? If it's, again, parenting stuff, if there's something that someone will go, that's me, right? And it's, again, there's not a lot of stigma. Those are great ways to kind of campaign, have trainings on those, and then, you can include the other benefits. And what we see in EAP is if someone accesses the EAP for any service, so maybe it's not counseling, but they're tabbing into like the elder care specialist, or they're relocating or moving or whatever it is, and they have that positive experience, that's when they start to come back. We see a lot of repeat users, right? Like the satisfied customer goes, well, that was helpful. What else is available to me? Or that was, I really liked working with that person, that human being. Like maybe this would be helpful. So I think, a couple things are, absolutely like what are the campaigns you can do, right? That it's like going to hit what's meaningful for that person. The great thing about EAPs, it's not just counseling services, and all of those services are going to reduce stress. They're going to impact, right, work performance by reducing those. It's kind of like that gateway in. And then again, I think just the training is huge. It's hard. I'm sure in manufacturing too, it's hard to pull people off to do trainings. But you'd be surprised if you have the right training and it's engaging and it's practical. You get people in that room and they start talking. They're like, they start talking. They're and you have those. We make sure our trainers use examples that are important to a particular industry. So I think again, it's a slow build, but starting to build that culture, talking about it, and encouraging the team leaders, like the unit managers, whatever you call them in the organization. Hard to do, but if you can train them to be comfortable and how to set the stage and how to talk about their experience, whether it's sleep, work-life balance. You don't have to use depression. You don't have to use anxieties. You can use other much more kind of approachable terms. You're going to start to see that culture shift.